The rise of InfoStealers. My name is Shai Alfasi. I'm a cybersecurity researcher at Reason Cybersecurity.
And I'm Dana. I'm a security researcher also in this team. And Reason Cybersecurity is focusing on end-to-end protection.
Talk outline. What we are going to speak about in this lecture. So we are going to speak about InfoStealer malware. We're going to really speak about what it is. We're going to speak also about the key differences between RAT and InfoStealer. And we're also going to see the evolution of InfoStealer and how it was evolved over the last years. The definition of InfoStealers. What is that? Basically, InfoStealer is information stealer. It's a type of malware that is designed to collect information from a remote host. So what does an InfoStealer actually steal? Basically, every access that it can. So on the day-to-day, we are using many apps and many platforms, different platforms. For example, Facebook, WhatsApp, Dropbox, and others. InfoStealer are focused on two things. The first one is, of course, getting the information from your browser and getting all the data so it can access those platforms. And secondary, it's actually the file system itself. So it means that the InfoStealer has two sides. The first stage of it is the browser mugging. As we can see on the right picture, we can see a process of an enumeration process that the malware is doing to actually find out which browser the computer have. And if it found some browser, so it actually goes and try to see if it can steal some information from the files. So what does actually browser mugging is? The InfoStealer is focusing on a few things. It focused on saved password that stays and saved on our browser. It focused on saved credit cards information, cookies and sessions, email addresses, username, phone numbers, first name and last name, and all the information that is saved on different forms that we filled out. Most of the time, as users, we don't like to put our credentials all the time. We don't like to type in. We like to give the browser the ability to remember and save our credentials so we can go faster and work faster with the browser. And it happens when you actually want to fill out some form, register form, maybe to sign up or log in to some platform or some website. So always the browser will actually try to ask us if we want to use the saved credentials that we have. Next is basically the file system mugging. The file system focused on things that happens on the file system itself and not the browser. So on the right picture here, we can actually see that we have an enumeration process of cryptocurrency wallets, such as Electrum, Ethereum, and other. Also, we are looking for screenshots, cryptocurrency wallets as we see, system information, Steam accounts, saved password, geolocation, and recent documents. Now, InfoStealers are actually today looking for more recent documents, and it's very interesting for them because if the user has some important files that it uses on a daily basis, so maybe it could have some value for the attacker itself. So the attacker can take this information and find out exactly what it is. And more than that, the information stealer could actually use all of those files and all of those credentials that it collects in order to actually elevate the attack itself to something which is much more bigger. So as we see right here, we can understand what exactly InfoStealer is and what it go after. So we saw it was split into browsers and also for file system, but let's really understand exactly how it operates and what are the key differences between an InfoStealer to a RAT.
So as Shai said, the InfoStealer comes to steal information. So we see it more as a quick attack where the malware reads the sensitive files and sends them back to the attacker, sometimes without the user even realizing it was compromised. Let's take, for example, the Raccoon InfoStealer. It remained undetected for a whole month, but not because it did some extraordinary AV evasion techniques, but because it kept its infrastructure dynamic and innocent looking. The Raccoon would send a request to Google Docs or to GitHub, and from the response, it would parse the IP address to realize the IP to send the data to. We want to emphasize why we see more InfoStealers distribution instead of RAT distribution. So for one, the very lack of an installation process or persistence or firewall changes or any other typical malicious changes to the system, all of those are potential IOCs or triggers for AV detection. And when we look at prices of buying a rat as a service or buying an InfoStealer as a service, we can see that there is an additional price for every new compilation. So when you take out the amount of IOCs that needs to be changed every time the malware is caught, you reduce the price significantly. Also, if you're operating this alone, it means less effort for you and less changes to the code. On the right, we can see how it is reflected in reality. When we look on the Mitrian attack chart, we can see that the less cubes marked means the less suspicious and less eye-catching the malware is. Additional benefits are the immediate access to the sensitive data. One can have access to someone else's wallet immediately instead of just waiting for the mining activity to get beneficial enough. Also, you don't have to wait for the specific time the user will log on to the specific site in order to get the passwords. And maybe a more philosophical point of view is the severity of the actions. Stealing passwords might feel less visually threatening than a ransomware, and doing it might feel less damaging for the moral attackers between us. Those details are later solved. For example, one credit card can reach the price of $5 up to $30, really depending on the amount of personal information included. For example, the geolocation of a credit card owner from Switzerland is worth way more than the one from Egypt. Besides gaining free access to the sensitive data, a more disturbing manner is of espionage, reconnaissance, and getting further access to even more sensitive accounts or environments that may have not been stored on the system while the attack occurred. While some malware check the geolocation, some also check the network name in order to derive the company name or just to steal Wi-Fi passwords. Think of how many sites require you for two-factor authentication and how many not, and how many regular users are actually bothering themselves to apply those protection mechanisms. So gaining access to those credentials may gain access to the VPN of a breached employee, to Zoom accounts or private GitHub projects of competitors, or just credential stuffing. Let's move on to some visual examples. This is an example of a JavaScript InfoStealer that we analyzed, and we can see how it is activating the functions of credential stealing. It steals from Chrome, FileZilla service, and then decrypting the password. After the data is stolen, it is being sent to the attacker. One of the most common ways we saw is of composing an email message with the address of the attacker, and the body contents are the stolen credentials. Sometimes it is even encrypted to avoid further detection. Also, our malware love to stay under the radar, and they are achieving this goal by using a whitelisted services such as Google Docs, GitHub, Twitter, Remote MySQL, and so on. That way, the infrastructure remains undetected for longer, and it is also harder to block, so the data can be exfiltrated successfully. So when you hear of passwords being stolen from web browsers, this is where the action actually happens. This is the Google Chrome user data default folder, and it contains many sensitive files such as cookies, history, and login data. The login data file contains all of the passwords, and similar files also exist for the rest of the browsers, such as Firefox, Opera, Thunderbird, and even email accounts or cryptocurrency wallets or Amazon credentials also can be stolen from the station. So this is how the login data file looks like when you open it in the SQL browser. And we can see that the login site and the username are stored in clear text, while the password is stored as an encrypted blob. This is the same JavaScript from before, but this time those are the functions to decrypt the password. In order to get the plaintext password, we use the Crypt and Protect Data API imported from Crypt32DLL. If you ever were physically in front of your browser and tried to look at your passwords, you know that the browser asks you for your Windows credential. But in code, it's not needed. This is a short Python code that does exactly that. We read the login data file and query it and execute an SQL query. We are querying for the site, username, and password, and for each result we iterate and apply our password decryption routine. You can see that there are two options here, and that is because in older versions of Chrome, one call to decrypt and protect data API function was enough, but in newer version, we also need to have the master key. But fear not, it's only like 5 lines of code. So to derive the master key, we read the local state file located in the same folder as the login data file. And then we derived the master key from a base64 encoded encrypted key and applied the same crypt unprotect data API function. Then we use it to generate an AES cipher and an IV that was stored alongside with the password blob, and we have the password. So what happens with all of the stolen data after all of this journey? We can see that we can sell a Swedish passport for $4,000, and all of the gaming and email and other accounts that we talked about are sold for $1. And paying methods are also well paid for. For example, you can see at the top chart that bank details can be sold for $250 as long as you have a minimum balance of at least $2,000. And PayPal is also interesting because you can pay for only the login credentials, or you can also pay for the transaction itself of the transformation of money. And this is another example of selling a bunch of Italian email addresses for $2, and another example of selling a pack of Spotify, Netflix, and Hulu accounts also for $2. So when you sell them over and over again, you can gain a lot of money. And that's basic cycle of stealing user information.
Great. So after understanding really how it operates and how InfoStealers are actually working from the technical side, let's understand what happened and how it works about the evolution of the InfoStealers itself. So we will start with a familiar InfoStealer that was out there since 2016, which called Azeroth. Azeroth, it's very basic InfoStealer, which of course was first seen again in 2016. The main purpose, it was to steal browsing history, cookies, passwords, credit card information, cryptocurrency, and of course system information. It was sold on a Russian underground forums. And today, we also see it being used by attackers. The last time that we came across the Azeroth, it was on our last threat research on the COVID-19, the map of threats. So what happened over there? It was actually that the malware itself, the attackers, were disguised the malware, the map of Johns Hopkins. So it took all of the statistics of Johns Hopkins map, and just what happened in the background is the malware itself, the InfoStealer itself, start running. And the Azeroth itself, it's pretty easy to follow because all the code and everything out there is pretty simple. If we take it and we reverse engineer it, we can see all the capabilities and abilities of this malware. And it was pretty simple to follow and see that it's an information stealer. So here in the picture, we can find out that the malware itself actually extracted a passwordlist.txt file and took my username and my password to my email account. And below that, we can see that it was sent via post response to the attacker itself. So the Azeroth itself, it's just an old malware from 2016 that doesn't have really a lot of capabilities, but it's very simple and it works until now. And the idea behind Azeroth is that you can still find it for sale in different forums and you can still take it and actually use it to steal information. Azeroth, it's a dummy malware because all of the capabilities are basically just the same, and it's basic and it's very easy to catch it and flag it. But when we go further, there are another InfoStealers. Like for example, Polu. Now Polu was first seen in August 10, and the idea behind Polu is that it used Adamantium Thief libraries from GitHub to actually steal the browser information, and it was sending the information to remote mysql.com database. So here we can see a file and a malware that doesn't come with the capabilities inside of the code. It was using external resources in order to take those abilities and to apply it on the workstation. So the idea here is that the file itself, the binary file itself, is the size of this file is less than 80 kilobytes. So it means that an AV will have a hard time to detect it, but not only because the file size is pretty light, it's because the idea is that there are no code inside the binary itself. There are just external resources that the malware is pulling out. So going up next, we can see another information stealer, which is pretty interesting, and it's the ZeroMax stealer as a service. The idea behind ZeroMax is basically that it doesn't came just as an info stealer. It also applies to you with a market. Now, when we are using some information stealer and we get the information itself, the next stage is to sell it. The next stage is to find out how we are going to make some money of it. So here we have the full package. We have a full framework. So we are not just selling a ZeroMax stealer, we also selling for you an access to a platform which you can sell all of your stolen information in this market, and you can make some money. The idea here is to actually motivate more attackers to use the ZeroMax InfoStealer because they will have a quick framework to sell all of the things that they stole. So as we can see here, we have actually some evolution of InfoStealers. We started with the Otherworld, which was pretty easy to find and pretty dummy because it did everything that it can. All the code came just in one pack. There is no usage with obfuscation or any other mechanism to actually try and cover the actions of this malware. And next we saw Palu, which Palu did something else. It was used with external resources from GitHub and from remote MySQL, and it's hard to detect that by AV because AV will take time to flag those external resources and then understand that this malware is actually a malware. And next, we saw the ZeroMax stealer, which was very interesting because it is not just an information stealer. It gives you and gives us the ability to sell all of the things that we have stolen to a market that is preloaded. So we can have a malware and a market, so we can have more motivation to use this kind of malware and of course steal more information. What's next? So as we can see, there is a huge difference between all of them, but we cannot predict for 100% and say exactly what is going to be, but we can say that we will see more and more malwares and information stealers like Palu and the ZeroMax stealer. Because information stealer, it's pretty light, it's pretty easy, it's quick, and we believe that more and more attackers will follow that path and will try to create more and more variants like that because it's much more harder to detect, and it takes less effort from the attacker to actually set up some CNC servers and more. So for more information, please feel free to reach us. Thank you very much.